Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you see a little link down below, you can click on that link and actually make it to Zoom. And once you get into Zoom, you can click on it again and get into Makana, and that's where you can actually ask questions and vote on questions. And the way you ask them and the way you vote on them runs the show. You are the producers. And the best thing to do is think about those questions all the time. Just write them down somewhere. Write them down on a piece of paper, on a Post-it, in notes on your computer, on your phone, and then bring them in here and start looking at. One of the things you want to start looking at is how different days, like we're talking about audio in the second hour. It's probably a lot of audio experts here to answer your questions. Same thing with each day, different groups of people end up here. So definitely think about what those are and think about when to ask your questions as well, so that we know that we have the best experts to do that. And we've got a lot of great experts here, half a millennia of experience to answer your questions every morning. If you think that you could add to the conversation, if you could actually answer some of these questions, then just get here a little early. 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is when we do mic checks. You got to be here by then to be part of the panel. We'd love to have you. If you're not sure if you're ready, if you want someone to look at your kit and test things and work on them, then come early. 6 o'clock is when we actually open the doors. So you can come here at 6. We just talk, just hang out, but we do look at people's kits if you raise your hand and ask for it. Then at 7, we have general Q&A, 7 to 8. And then at 8 o'clock, we do a more focused thing. So today we're going to be talking about audio chains and how to connect all these audio devices together effectively. Tomorrow we've got drones with Ray Maxwell. Pretty excited about that. Thursday, we're going to talk about digital first events and what that means and what it means for the industry. And then on Friday, we're going to really talk about CDNs. What CDN should you be using? For every one of them is good for some things, and which ones are better for this and which ones are better for that. Saturday is a very long day. We recommend clearing your schedule. So we have education, general discussion. Then we're going to talk about the future of education. Then we're going to talk about the remotes, 3 hours of the remotes, talking about how they produce that song as a group. So it'll be a while. We will give you breaks. I promise there'll be breaks. But it should be a really great day. If you actually want to share what we're doing here, you can simply don't share your own link. You want to share the link that I'm going to put into Makana. That's the best way to show it with others. If you share your own link, you'll come in. Everyone will come in as you. If you share that link, they'll come in as themselves. We want everyone to be themselves most of the time. Anyway, all right, Bill, go ahead, take it away.
Doug Ferguson of Fort Wayne, Indiana has our first question for this morning. And he says, for major production elements like switchers, cameras, and lenses, do you trust buying used gear?
Lenses, yes, for me anyway. Lenses, I can sometimes, look into. Electronics, what I look at is were these on the road or were these in a server room? If they're in a server room, I tend to be a little bit more like, oh, I could probably make that work. If they're road gear, I tend not to do that. Go ahead, Mickey.
I have to agree. Like lenses, as long as you get the opportunity to check them out before purchasing, then yeah, I would definitely get lenses, especially if they're older ones that are difficult to find new nowadays. For cameras, I feel that nowadays cameras tend to be a flavor of the month kind of thing. So I don't see a huge point in buying secondhand unless it's like, on the upper end of things.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Secondhand gear is also good for experiments, such as those of us who might want to remove the filters off the front of a sensor for a full frequency camera or doing infrared. So if you want to play, yes, but if you want to work, buy new, get a manufacturer's warranty.
Go ahead, Chris.
You also might want to be careful of anything that a drink could have been spilled into.
Yeah, that's the hard part with
you have no idea how things were.
You don't know what happened, and also it's not just pouring water into it. Humidity, just working in humid environments, that's not good for the machine stuff over time. Yeah, and then also just people setting things down hard. Like we talk a lot about having soft hands. Of the last inch is all that matters. You can move it around as fast as you want. Just that last inch come in for a soft landing. A little ease in, ease out. And so we talk about that a lot in our warehouses of just not setting things down hard, because that just slowly wears things out. And it's really important. Jeffrey, and then Courtney, and then Joshua, and then Jason.
I'll buy used gear, and I've done this in the past. I'll buy used gear as a backup for the primary, even if I don't have the primary. So let's say I'm getting a camera, I'll get the backup. just to kind of test it out, see if it's ready for if I'll actually get the actual version. But then it'll become spare parts. So if like a button breaks or something like that, I can easily replace it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I'll buy factory refurbs because they usually come with the manufacturer's full warranty, or at least a 30 or 90-day warranty. And I never buy used rental gear because it's been beat to death.
Man. Yeah. Like you have no idea what happens. That's why I don't really rent that often for mission critical stuff is because you just never know what happened to it. Joshua and then Jason.
I'd also ask for any details on repairs because I know of at least one Grass Valley kayak that was a victim of a large slushy, and the repair was continuously pouring rubbing alcohol in it until it all ran out.
Jason.
Yeah, actually, Courtney kind of answered my question. I was going to tag on and say, what about certified refurbished?
Yeah. I think certified refurbished goes pretty well. A lot of the electronics we use will work pretty well. If they work after the first month, they'll work for a long time if you treat them well. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, if you want to buy used gear, I would develop a relationship with your dealer that sells used gear. Get to know someone there so that you can trust them. There are several really good vendors that do sell some used gear. But again, developing a personal relationship so that you're bound to get the best of the used gear is good advice.
Right. Next question.
Gabriel Ong from Malaysia comes in with our webinar event just surpassed 1,000 attendees. Congratulations. Forcing us to look at the next jump up in Zoom webinar tiers, and that adds a lot to the cost. Is it possible to purchase 2 webinar packages, a 500 pack and a 1,000 pack tier with the same enterprise account and then run them concurrently?
You absolutely can. You just have to figure out how you're going to send the same video signal to both of them, and then how if you're going to have speakers from each one. So what I would think about is having all the speakers in one side, but you're going to have to figure out how you take that one and pipe it to the other one, and that can get complicated. So that's the thing. You can't link them together. You can absolutely have 2. You can't run both of them from the same account. I mean, you can run it from the same account, but not the same user. So you'd have to have 2 different users in the same account. One can be set up for the 500, one can be set up to the 1,000, and each one of them can launch it. But you're going to have to figure out how you get the video from one into the other. What I would probably look at doing is running the core out of one of them, and then passing the participant view back into the other one as it. And for the average attendee, it won't make any difference because they're only seeing the screen that you're giving them. So you could probably pull that off. Those are, I mean, that's you can do it with 2 of them. The other thing to remember though, is that 1,000 registrants doesn't mean that there's 1,000 people coming. So it's a little dangerous, but also think about having that 500 as a spare, but not necessarily, turning it on or having people go into it until you run into overflow. So for instance, there are over 3,000 people registered for this webinar, but we rarely get more than, we might have 400 or 500 every day coming through the system, or 300 or 400 coming in through the system, but we rarely have more than 150 to 200 concurrent, and the 1,000 limit is concurrent. So also just know that if you have a free, typically the calculation is if you have a free event, your attendance tends to be somewhere between 40 and 60%. Now, if they pay for it, that tends to be 85 to 100% or 110%. So, but if it's an unpaid one, and if they're paying for it, you can afford it because you've calculated that into the cost. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Another thing to think about is for anybody that's not being an attendee type level, that you can port it over to something like Facebook and have a closed garden from there, or other services that are closed gardens where they have to register for.
Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
Logistically speaking, one could create a meeting that was a pro account and have 2 separate webinar meetings and pump a virtual feed out of that first meeting of presenters into any number of webinars at one time. Yep. It's really just
lost you, Leland.
Frozen.
All right. Next question.
Sources as far as your capabilities go with hardware stuff. And
Leland, you're stopping and starting, Leland. We're not sure exactly what's going on there. Next question.
Roberto Barrow of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, what are your thoughts on BOXCAST, pros and cons? I think I pulled it up. That's what their website looks like. I don't know anything more about it than that.
I have to do more research in BOXCAST. I believe they have a couple advantages. They're doing some higher bit depth streams from point to point and so on and so forth, but I haven't had enough. I haven't had a chance to really play with them. it's another interesting player, but I don't have. I'm looking around to see if anyone else raises their hand. But yeah, go ahead, Joshua.
I haven't used the current 4K version, but the original with the composite inputs was basically just a glorified Raspberry Pi that had a tendency to hang up a lot for me. So I'd be careful with that if you're doing long length.
We'll see if we can get it into the lab and test it. It seems like an interesting thing to work on. Next question.
David Brady of New York says, thanks for the advice last night on getting away from some green switches. What are some of the favorites among the panel? And he has a note, I might check the used section for office hours tags.
JJ.
FS.com, they have some great affordable managed switches. And I'm a person who prefers managed switches, and they're highly configurable and very affordable. The back end is a higher end back end that can actually pass the 10 gigs of traffic that normally, and you can have small switches too. That's the other nice thing. They're small, they're fanless, they're rack mountable. So FS.com, they're great, but they're, yeah, it's not Cisco. Cisco could be my druthers, but FS.com for a budget.
Yeah, I mean, I will say again, this is an expensive solution, but you know, the Cisco stuff is pretty nifty, and the Meraki switches mixed with the Meraki routers and the Meraki APs gives you an ecosystem that is unparalleled, in my opinion. It's just expensive. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Meraki is absolutely unparalleled. For those of us without that amount of money, I'd say Ubiquiti's professional and the Edge switches are fantastic.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, definitely Edge switches on the more affordable side of sorry, I'm blanking. What's the brand of the SG300? Cisco's SG300. That line is pretty good, and it's not as expensive as the higher end Cisco stuff. Also, look at stuff from Netgear and TP-Link. I've had good luck with those as well.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, second everything everyone else has already said, but to add on Aruba Instant On, it's like their small medium business line. I've had really good luck with that. They also provide 10 gig options.
Yeah, Aruba's a good setup. Absolutely. Marty.
The Netgear, the new line of Netgear stuff is specifically configured for audiovisual use.
Oh, wow. Which one is that? What line is that?
I think it's the N3400, or I'll look it up.
That's interesting. Absolutely. Next question.
Vita Brody from Calgary, Canada says Zoom has recently added the ability for a host to disable the attendee chat mid-webinar. Is there a way to simply remove an offensive comment instead? Assuming there is not, can the panel suggest a good moderator chat app unless Alex is ready to offer Mukana in the next few weeks? There you go.
You can contact me directly. We hand build it for folks for events. It's not super inexpensive for us to do because it's all done by hand, but eventually it will be more widely available. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the Mukana stuff that's built in that you guys don't have to interact with that much is actually built for troll suppression. So it's just designed to, like, all I care about is the conversation. So it's like, how do I thump a comment or a person out of the system if it's problematic? There's a lot of tools for that. But I don't quite understand. I haven't quite figured out why Zoom doesn't let you delete chat, but it is one of the reasons that it's one of the reasons that we pushed very quickly out of the chat in webinar, was that if there was a lot of offensive chat comments, we couldn't get rid of them. They're just stuck there. And so it's an odd thing. Yep. Next question.
Comes to us from Jim Abram in Hesperia, California, I believe. How do you connect multi-monitors to a Mac Mini M1?
Right now, it technically only supports 2. Mickey, did you want to jump on that?
Yeah, aside from the built-in HDMI output and a Thunderbolt or USB-C to HDMI or DVI converter, you can also get what they call a display link adapter, which is essentially a USB, a video adapter that runs on the USB bus, not any of the graphics buses.
Yep. And Courtney's showing you one right there, Jeffrey, and then Ken.
So the M1 does 4K monitors, so you could actually put a adapter in there to put in for 1080p monitors from a 4K signal, right?
I don't know. I mean, it really just only looks at 2 monitors.
But
within the system, it's 2. Ken, and then Chris.
Yeah, you can actually, I'll share a link to a YouTube video where a guy actually connected 6 monitors to his M1. And he used this device, multiples of this device to actually do that.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, to be fair, the guy doing 6, he was making deals with gods and doing all kinds of weird voodoo. The pluggable company, which is what this thing is, what Ken just showed, that is the display link thing. I've been circling my wagon around this for a couple of months now, and the thing that has worked the best is Pluggable has a thing that has 3 HDMI outs. Unfortunately, it's not a logical limitation. It's a marketing limitation on Apple's part. They claim they can do 2 4Ks display, so you'd think, oh, well, that's a lot of pixels. Can I spread it out over more monitors? And it's not that. The OS is looking at the monitor count, and it just stops you when it hits 2. The way the pluggable the pluggable that has the 3 HDMI outputs that I use, the way it works is it's just telling the computer there's one weird monitor out there, and it kind of like the old Matrox triple heads used to do. And so then it cuts it up. So I'm only using technically 3/8 of the number of pixels that the computer can do, but I have to trick it to get the 3 outputs.
The tricking part is the part that usually gets me away from it from a production perspective.
Scares me too. I wish I didn't have to.
Tyler, did you have?
I was going to see if the triple head to go worked with the M1 Mac Mini, and if it did, then that would be a solution. But I don't know if he asked about 4K or if it was 3 screens of 1080.
I think it's just three. I mean, it didn't. Now he just has multiple monitors, because for your second monitor, this is what I have a lot of these USB-Cs to HDMIs, and this does the trick. This is made by Uni, which I've become very attached to. I got a lot of Uni converters and cables on Amazon for not very much money, and they all seem to work. Next question
comes, I guess, to me. TJ Asher said, Bill, last night you shared some clips for securing cables. Can you provide a link to those clips? Yeah, let me show you what it was. It was these guys. So you can see if you can afford them, they're $5.99 per 24. So they come in black and white. They are plastic. They will not last you forever, but they're a whole lot less expensive than like the Sony Tie-Tac clips that run you $50 a piece or something like that. And I will try to get to the you get a big pack like this. I'll try to get to the Amazon link and post it in the chat.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer of Melbourne, Florida says, engagement technologies. We're using Spatial Chat for our virtual conference for the next 2 weeks. But what other functions do you add for engagement?
There's a lot of levels of engagement. So that you just have to decide, so if you look at the levels of engagement that we have here, we have obviously some video engagement. We have people having the opportunity to chat with each other, which is important. People having the opportunity to ask questions and then vote on those questions. And when you think about that engagement, you want to think about it. You have to separate chat from Q&A or it doesn't work, in my opinion. It's why we separate it here. It's because you want people to, if you don't only have question and answer, people will use the Q&A as a chat function. And if you only have chat, people will fill it up, put questions and you can't find them. That's why everyone wants low latency videos, because they don't have good chat systems or Q&A systems. And so you separate those two out. Voting is important because it makes people stakeholders in the questions. So that you're there, it gives the audience far more control over the conversation. And as we found here, is that we don't need to have anything else to say. We just let them ask questions and vote on them. I do believe in the downvote because it causes some critical thinking on the questioner's side to think about what the entire audience wants as opposed to what they want. The next level of interaction is, of course, what we call kinetic interaction from an online audience. And so what that is being able to affect things in the real world. Well, there's polls too. Sorry. There's polls that you can do. And we're playing more and more with polls. We don't do them a lot here, but our system supports them. And so asking people things and, putting things up that are fun and using them part of the conversation is useful. I think ours is so off-roading because we're answering questions all the time that the polls are harder to use because we don't have enough of a plan. But the But the kinetic one is basically using audience interaction to affect things in the real world. So I think an example I've talked about in the past was we had an audience was allowed to turn a flamethrower on with voting. They got super excited about it. 140,000 interactions a minute. So it's people can get, so letting the audience actually impact things in the real world is a very powerful incentive to interact. And so those are the things too. It's a tool that we don't, we play around with. And the way you do that, by the way, is you're tying, typically the easiest way to do kinetic interaction is to connect something like a SQL database to an Arduino so that you're turning data into electrical impulses. And then after that, it's really easy, just solenoids and things and whatever else you want to tie it to. So anyway, those are things to, think about as you think about what's possible in that area. But the most important thing is people being able to interact with the speakers, interact with each other. And so those are the things that you want to think about. Since no one else raised their hand, next question.
Comes from JJ McKenna here in the panel from Santa Venetia, California. Alex, in consideration of a confirmation bias in Zoom attendance, might it not be true that the nature of classrooms is less enjoyable than a forum like office hours?
I don't think the classrooms have to be less enjoyable. I think that there's a whole bunch of functions that, this is probably more of a education hour thing, but I think that I don't think classrooms have to be less enjoyable. I think that they are because of the structure of how we do it. Go ahead, JJ.
Well, that query is kind of based on, again, in re-examining that Stanford paper,
right?
The intent of why it was written, how it was written, and the folks who wrote it. And I, reflecting our time here in this room, I think it's vastly different. Thus, the feelings behind that are also vastly different. Like you said, coming here is a joyful work that hasn't had a single day of labor yet.
Right.
So
I think that when you have the robust conversations about things, I think people are more engaged. I think that that's the issue, is that we're changing subjects a lot. The audience has control over it. The audience can listen to it, and it's constantly something new and something different. I think listening to a lot of the same thing, this would get boring too if we did lots of long presentations. It's just, that was an idea, but if we look at even the Socratic method, that's thousands of years old, that was a conversation. It wasn't a traditional lecture. And so we had it figured out, and then we did something else, and we decided, 1,000 years ago to start giving lectures, and then, 100 years ago, we started using, some kind of imagery. And then, 20 years ago, we started using PowerPoint and death by PowerPoint. So, but the issue is that all the teachers that I can remember when I was growing up were people who had interactive conversations with the class. So nothing's changed. Like we're having, the teachers that inspired me are the ones that weren't up there going anyone, and, just long lectures of how to do it. It was ones that got up there and we had a conversation. We talked about, we had what we read, and then we had Q&A, and then I'm modeling after the teachers that I, were inspired by, so, and just, I think that the hard part is that some people can really dig through that. There's some people that are just better at listening to people drone on than others. And there's just the vast majority of folks. And the problem is that those are the people that all end up in education because it models that, and so they that's what they like. And so we have to figure out ways that how can we make it more interactive and fun? Go ahead, Tyler.
I do video here for a university and in San Diego. And what we've found is that even though we've made a studio and we've done video for all these professors, the ones that hold the students' attention are the ones that are on Zoom and have interactivity. But the videos that we put on YouTube, even with, a 2-up and chapter markers per slide.
But the problem is the slides aren't useful. Like that's the issue is that people are really connected to their slides, and slides in themselves are just not enough, and so the thing is that you're better off with short bits of content that are going to prep the students, for what they need. and then conversations. And the slides might be as illustrations inside that content, but typically I bet you a lot of those slides have a lot of text. No one's going to want to read that. It's what you should be doing. You should, if you are lecturing your slide. So when I send a slide deck out for people to read, and I make an average of 1 slide deck a day, and if I know they're going to read it and I'm not going to be there, I put some text on it, but very little. I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about how to visually describe a workflow or a thing without having to basically fall back to words. Words are just me giving up. I'm out of time. I'll just say it because I can't figure out a way to illustrate it. So I'll go back to text that way. The most powerful ones that I've sent, that I've like literally moved entire programs and companies with, is me recording a video of it, talking of a slide deck, but the slide deck has almost no words. It has illustrations that I've rehearsed to, and I just sit there and just go through it, and it's like a little animated video, but there's not any words. Words are not part of that process. If you want words, then use PageMaker or whatever, InDesign. Don't use a slide deck for words. Anyway, so when you have, the most powerful way to use those illustrations, in my opinion, is that you talk over it and you keep on cutting back. That's why the switcher is so important to me as part of my presentation tools, is that I want to be able to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between me and the switcher, between me and my content. Hey, I want to show you something, because there are things when I'm talking about signal flows or resolutions or other things like that, an image saves me a lot of talking. I can, in a video that I can show you as an example saves me a lot of things there's things that I can't talk through. A good example is when you're mixing bread, there's this thing that you do that you break. Once you've mixed everything up, you basically do this pincher movement where you kind of cut the bread with your fingers, and then you remix it, and then you cut it a couple more times. I was reading a book, and there was like 2 pages describing how to do that. It took 10 seconds on a video to show. Like, as soon as I saw it, I didn't need to ever see it again. Like it was, and it's a perfect example of words versus illustration. So the videos are very powerful and they're very useful, but they need to be mixed with people. They then just need context. You're just talking and using them to illustrate it. Then I do believe that this live experience creates urgency. And it creates a place where all of us can think about that problem at the same time. And that's why I think that, what we're doing with Ripple training is another step down that path. We're not there yet, but we're another step down that path of where we can all watch some videos on our own. We can play with the thing and then just come in and have conversations. And I think most people found, people can raise their hand yes or no, but the Ripple training we did last Saturday was a lot better than watching somebody teach you how to use Resolve, like for an hour. If you're gonna take an hour of Q&A about Resolve, and you're going to learn a lot more with the Q&A than you are. You can go back and look at the reference materials and get ready for it, and then have that conversation. But using up live time to do that, and then also we have to think about what we're asking people to monotask. So if you're lecturing, for instance, and you don't have a lot of illustrations, then you just make it audio. Just listen to it. Let people listen to it, because they can walk around, they can clean their house, they can walk, which just makes them. It's easier to remember things if you walk while you're listening to it. Hosmuk?
Yeah, what you're talking about is something we experienced with a recent medical event, where all the lectures were pre-recorded with their slide decks, sent to the learners 2 weeks ahead of time. They watched it, but the actual live event was pure Q&A. And we ran out of time for every session.
Yeah, and there's more drive when you're going to have Q&A with an expert. There's more drive to watch the videos, because they are, there's a reason to watch the videos, because this is the one moment you get to actually ask questions, and you're actually going to get to ask questions of that expert. And so you're more likely to watch the videos because they're prepping you so that you can get all the information that you need from them, in that process. And so it's the interaction between the Q&A. So someone who is incredibly knowledgeable, we get so little information out of them on a live event because they're just talking through something we could have watched at some other time or listened to or something else. And then there's also, it engages students who, at all levels, there's some students that can just sit in the conversation and listen to all the questions and ask questions, and they don't need to read the stuff ever. because they can assimilate that information. You know, I was one of those people that as long as we talked about it in class, I would do okay, because I'm not very good at reading. So I just want, if you didn't cover it in class, if you didn't at least discuss it for a moment, it would be a black hole for me. But otherwise, I did pretty well. Anyway, so I think that I don't think it's one thing or the other. I think what we have to find when we talk about education at professional, at university, at K through 12, is how do we build an ecosystem of knowledge that is a mixture of conversations, video where you need it, audio where you need it, challenges where you need it, teamwork where you need it, and all those things. And how do we mix those for things that have you walk away with that knowledge? And I think that we're at the very early stages of that, but it's a new phase of knowledge when we figure it out. Next question.
Comes from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. For those on the panel who are producing shows virtually, possibly coaching or directing talent as they record at home, what do you wish you knew when you first started?
Osmond?
I wish I knew it was so addictive, and that is such a lot of hard work. But what it's done is it's created the opportunity to exponentially reach out to many, many more people in the way I try and serve and communicate. And I thoroughly enjoy it. So the addiction is great. I wish I had to spend as much money as I have spent, but I continue to spend because now I'm getting a 6K camera. I'm going to get the new ATEM, because all of that just allows me to scale what I'm doing. I was in the pre-show, I was saying I had a board meeting with Africa.com registry. I sit on that board and they're based in Mauritius. We had about 15 people in there. And I hosted the meeting and it just blew the socks off everybody. I had lower thirds for the speaker and all sorts of things, and they just went completely nuts. So I think it's a completely non-profit organization, but I just propel them to the new world. And so I wish I knew it was so addictive, but man, am I enjoying this.
Well, and it is a matter of, and what I'm hoping that we are doing here is we're getting better together, and that we're hopefully proving what's possible here, you know, and then we take it out into the world, because all people have to do is see it. They just have to see what we're doing, and you're like, oh, it doesn't have to be, it could be really great. Go ahead, Jason, and then Joshua, and then Stuart.
I wish I would have known the absolute importance of two things: dress rehearsals and onboarding. You know, talking to every participant every time, you know, making sure they know exactly what they need to know. And then also, you know, a dress rehearsal is not optional, because that's where you make your mistakes, if you're lucky.
Go to Joshua, Stewart, and then Mickey.
I wish I would have known to not be afraid to tell my participants or presenters or whoever that, yes, even though you're sitting at home, this is still an event. You still need to treat it like one, still be on time, still rehearse, all of it. Still don't have a window behind you.
And one of the things that we got really good at was understanding that our job, we are an advocate, number one, for the audience, and we're also an advocate for that person to do better than they think that they should, because we don't want them to be embarrassed later when they look at the video, you know. And we realized that we had people come back. I would get executive assistants for CEOs in the early years coming back and go, why didn't you tell us it looked so bad or it sounded so bad? We would have fixed it. You know, we've got money, you know, like we would have made it go away. You just didn't tell us because we didn't want to push too hard. You know, they would go, oh, it's not really convenient. We go, okay. And then they looked and sounded bad. And then they were mad later or embarrassed or didn't want to talk about it or whatever, and thought that, well, virtual events stink. Whereas we found that if we just press down a little harder and say, hey, it would really make a difference if you did this, that they would be more proud of it and more likely to do more of it. And it really built up a lot of business for us because they would come out of our events feeling excited. Stuart, and then Mickey.
The thing I wish I knew before I started is something very simple: where the mute all function is on every piece of software, just for when the conversation gets out of control and we just need to cool it down a bit and go again.
Yeah, Mickey. And then Jeffrey.
Yeah, along the same lines of what you were saying earlier, Alex, I wish I knew, at least with the minimal experience I've had with live events, that at times some presenters or executives can be hard-headed in terms of their technical setups. even though they're paying you to be the person to say these things, they still won't follow what you say.
Yeah. Yeah. And for us, it's, sometimes they're going to learn it and sometimes it's just going to be a lesson. Like we know that we just get to a point where we can't push any harder and we just go, well, they'll see everybody else and then they'll see themselves. And at least we said it. And usually we send an email to whoever the event producer is. And it was what we call a CYA, like, hey, this person isn't doing X, Y, and Z. This is what we're worried about. And then if it doesn't work out, then it comes back and they go, oh, well, they told us it wasn't going to work. Jeffrey?
Laptops with cameras on the bottom of the screen and microphones next to the keyboard.
Yeah. The again, just audio. That's the only thing I'll say is that just the thing is the first thing to fix is audio. Just remember, we can watch a lot of bad things. It's just hard to listen to and hard to understand what people are actually saying. Next question.
Comes from our friend Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman in New York City, who says, it seems after looking through forums that many people have issues streaming to YouTube with an ATEM Mini Pro. I'm trying to guide a friend who's having the same issue. Has anyone in the panel run into this problem? And is there a set of steps you have found that helps locate the issue?
Jeffrey?
Biggest thing is, and the problem is, you go direct out into anything. And I was doing this with Restream yesterday. You go out to a service like that, you don't know what the connection is going to happen between your machine and their machine. I always like to have an intermediary in between everything, something I can see and record from. So in this case, what I would probably do, it's the Pro, is use that USB-C cable, bring it into something like OBS or whatnot, and then have that stream out to YouTube. That way I can also record it at the source, and then I'd have a backup copy if there's a problem.
Yeah, I wish that we had the same telemetry data that looks like is coming with the web presenter. I don't think we get all that telemetry with the ATEM, and so I think that is getting that data is important to make that work. Next question.
Comes from Gabriel Ong of Malaysia, frequent questioner here. Out of curiosity, Jason's in front of a green screen. Why choose to key it and replace it with gray? By the way, your key looks great. Almost had me fooled until you showed your setup in a cutaway.
Well, first, thanks. And because gray is less distracting and it blends more easily. And, if I were to do this, then it would just be electric and you wouldn't see anything but that.
It's good. It's good. Next question.
Ernest Floyd of Bastrop, Louisiana says, I'm setting up a group of lawyers and I need a pull-down mountable background, 72 inches wide in neutral gray. Recommendations?
The one I'm using behind me right now is a Lazalite 6 foot by 7 foot. You can only buy it by B&H. It's $156, I think. At last I looked, it moves up and down by a couple $10 here and there. It pops open and it's Lycra. Lycra is a lot easier to use than cloth. And you can get stands for it that are built for it. Mine's is hanging from a grid, so but you can get them that way, and that I find that that's the best one. I mean, you can get things for less. I haven't found anything for less money that I would use other than that. And it doesn't matter. I don't care what's on the back of it. It's like there's some with white, some with black, some with blue, some with green. I think mine is white, but it doesn't matter to me because I'm just using the gray. And then you can light it any way you want, as you can see behind me. Next question.
Tyler Darlington of San Diego says, and I think you're in the panel, says, looking for a way to auto mix video angles with the audio auto mixer. Is that where each mic is assigned a camera angle? Open the mic triggers the camera angle. Is this possible with an ATEM Mini Pro? And can I do this in post via Reaper?
Clarification. I can do it in post. I'm looking for a way to do it with hardware. So that way, if for some reason I'm a participant live, I don't have to be the one switching.
Yeah, we've built tools like that for things like Zoom, and not Zoom, but for Hangouts. And we haven't built it into the hardware. It wouldn't be hard. It is hard. I mean, it's not, the hard part is getting it clean. Eventually what you'll want is something that lets you kind of what we call soft select, which is that it'll auto switch between the people that you tell it to. It's not super good at just letting it run on its own. But the interaction between a human and the compute and the hardware of having it be half human, half machine is super powerful. You'll get a better edit than a human can do and a better edit than the machine can do if you're kind of softly guiding it to where you want to go. The one thing you and again, those are tools that we've built in the past in software. I just haven't built them that we just haven't. I haven't had the time or the programmers to do it, but to do it with hardware. But it would definitely the key is having individual control over attack and decay over each person, because their audio will affect it differently, and so if you have dials for that, it's pretty useful. Jason, and then Marty, and then Guy.
This is a tricky one. I can give advice at very least. The ATEM, all of the ATEMs except MIDI. And so what I'm thinking is you would use something along the lines of a control surface in Reaper, and in turn relay, MIDI using any number of applications to in turn trigger a macro maybe on the ATEM. But that's the best I got off the top of my head.
Lean more towards like ATEM OSC probably is probably the thing that I would think about more than MIDI. Marty, and then Guy.
Yeah, you need a way to get information from your audio mixer as to what input is being activated. So like, for example, on an X32, you can extract OSC data about which audio input channel is being used. You can also use an external DSP like a Symmetrix or a Biamp or something like that has auto mixing built into it and can output that data. That'll instruct the ATEM as to which mic is being used and therefore which camera to switch to.
And Marty, you have a little bit of clicking in your audio. Do you know what that is in the chain?
I couldn't hear. I tested it before and I couldn't hear it on my end.
You're not. I'm just curious if you're using NDI at all.
No.
No. Okay. It sounds like NDI. Guy.
Yeah, there's a mixer by Roland. There's a couple of them, but this is the one that I use. It's a Roland VR1 HD, and man, this saved my bacon on a 24-hour gig where I didn't want to be there. I just set it up to that director mode, and it's called Video Follows Audio, and the VR1 HD switches automatically based on who's talking. So when that mic opens up, it switches to video 1. Mic 2 opens up, it goes to input 3. No mic or sound, input 3. So close up, wide shot. That's the VR1 HD.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. That's perfect. Because I'm trying to, we have students at university who basically want to do their own podcast. And so if we deploy some sort of hardware unit for different groups of people to use, where, we just can't, our whole team can't be there for all of these different podcasts, then that's kind of the foresight we have.
I will say that in the long term, what you want to do is train, people often want to do hardware or software development to avoid wetware development. And I think that the best thing to do is really teach the students how to do it and let them cut bad shows and then talk about them, and get them better at doing it than taking away the skill set. I mean, that's the only thing I would think about is that especially for student podcasts that are probably not being listened to by a large number of people. I mean, I don't mean to be rough, but it's it's not going to be thousands or tens of thousands of people typically until they get good at it. If they're learning and figuring it out, it's just an opportunity for them to learn how to switch and critically think about, what to do. I would be tempted to do that first and have just one of them is accountable for that, and they have to learn how to do it in a teaching environment. Mickey, did you have something? No,
yeah, I was going to say, do we know if a Zoom OSC is capable of sending out information on who unmutes?
No, you could
because
totally.
then you can tie that in with probably ATEM OSC. Although people really have to be on the ball in terms of muting and unmuting when they're talking and not.
What all we did was when we did this with Hangouts is that we did kind of like a Dugan. We just looked at who has the highest volume at that moment, and then there was a threshold of them staying there as the highest moment, and a threshold of that, and as an attack, how quickly are we going to go to them, and a decay of when they stop or someone else comes in, when are we going to go to somebody else? And so figuring out that interaction was how we really had to figure it out. And we had those all dialable, so we could change them on the fly for each person. Tyler?
I know this was like a second hour thing, but what was the signal flow for that kind of a thing?
It's all built into the Hangouts. It was all built into the Hangouts API. So there wasn't an extra. That's why I haven't done it yet. I'm getting into it. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. sorry. Okay, I lost my train of thought
Okay.
but real quick. With the ATEM, the advantage of that, since Tyler it seems like you do have a post workflow after the fact. An advantage if you do upgrade to the ATEM Mini ISO or the Extreme ISO is that you can have a multicam cut right out of the gate there. If you
Yeah, I'm
do the
just looking
whole.
for a live solution.
All it is looking. You just need to get the signal data back from your mixer and just know which one is loudest. I mean, that's that's the thing that you're looking for. Next question
comes to us from Dorian Robinson, who's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on the island of Bermuda. That's exciting. Is the Apple Mac Mini M1 suitable as a video workstation for editing and streaming?
Go ahead, Jason.
Absolutely. Next question.
And I would say it depends. There's still a lot of audio video stuff that isn't working on the M1 yet. So I've got like 10 or 12 of them right now and they're working great. But I would step lightly, like things like Dante don't work yet on the M1. And so you want to look at all the tools you're going to use and make sure that there's M1 versions of them or they're compatible with M1 before you jump into that. Ken and then Mickey, and we'll move on.
Yeah, I've got the 16 gig MacBook Pro and presently doing the obviously controlling the streaming right now, and I'm also doing the Resolve course on it, and yeah, not a hiccup.
That's great. Mickey?
I would say for 1080p workflows on codecs such as ProRes or DNX HD, that should not be an issue, and possibly even 4K workflows on those codecs. But once you have to dive into raw codecs like Red Raw, Blackmagic Raw, stuff like that, it's gonna struggle. And a very, very quick side note: Ken Jordan reminds me of Gustavo Fring, if you guys know who he is.
It's great. Next question.
Moving on to Michael Marsh of San Anselmo. The M1 Mac Mini tops the Geekbench single core performance chart, but is absent in the multi-core chart. Why is this?
I don't actually have a great answer. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm convinced because the Geekbench wasn't really designed for the way that Apple does custom silicon. Like that's my best answer for that. It is truly its own thing.
Joshua?
I think some apps, if they're running under Rosetta will only report one beast of a core versus the two or however many the M1 itself has.
Right. Yep. And I think that as more apps are written for it, it'll show more and use more. Next question.
Andy Seal of Oldbury in the UK says, currently use a 12 to 60 millimeter Lumix lens on my Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K on a Moza Across 2 gimbal during construction walkthroughs. It's just not wide enough for smaller rooms. What lens would give me the widest view without a lot of distortion? And would you recommend any third-party lenses given that it's not art?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, at 12 millimeters on any lens, you're starting to get to the point where everything barrel distorts. So your best bet there is actually to ditch the Lumix lens, grab a full frame 12 millimeter lens and use a focal reducer to get the full frame image circle down to fit on the micro four thirds sensor of the camera.
There you go. Next question.
Tommy Chance of St. Paul, Minnesota says, speaking with a big box salesperson, they said 8 gig of RAM is enough because of the M1 in the Mini. What do you folks have and how are they working?
All of mine are 8 because we needed them quickly and that was all I could get. And they work fine for what we're using them for. But we use Minis as glue. If I bought one that I was going to do work on, I would always get 16. I mean, to start with. Jason?
No, your answer was right.
I mean, the way I use Minis and the way I've used them since they came out was like glue that I use for things, and I use it for this thing. I'm not trying to do big, heavy lifting with them. But I think that I would always put a fair bit of RAM in it. You will run. It's just hard. You can't replace it. So you're committing to 8. when you buy a Mac Mini 8, you're at 8. So when you hit the ceiling, you're going to buy a new computer. And that's, so I would definitely get as much as you can right now. Next question.
Wilson Martinez of Charlotte, North Carolina says, Alex, is there somewhere I can go and see what camera light and background you use?
I'm working on it. One of the things I want to put into the new site that I'm working on right now, design, like laying out, which will have a very core version of it up by Monday, is a place where a lot of us can do that. Like it's a place where the panelists can just go, if you want to see what Bill uses or I use or Jason uses or if Mickey uses, it'll just be kind of like a list of our gear. So you can look at someone and just go, okay, well, that's what I'm going to take. And part of the reason we have everyone do the audio chains and possibly the video chains when we do mic checks is to kind of tell you what that is. What I'm using right now, just so you know, it's a Blackmagic 6K with a 24-70 Canon lens. I've got a couple Nanlite 100s over me, and then I've got a Laserlight in the background with a mixed panel 60 doing the color. Next question.
Gabriel Ong of Malaysia is back with, is there a way for the Blackmagic ATEM Mini's color shading to adjust the overall color rather than just lift gamma and gain separately?
Yeah, it's called well, it depends on what you're shading. The way to do that is a LUT. If you're using a 4K or a 6K or an Ursa, the smaller cameras don't do that. But lookup tables are going to give you the ability to make it look exactly the way you want it to look. It's going to give you a lot more color control. So, but you can get pretty far with the shading inside of you're able to open up those color wheels. Remember that if you're really getting serious about any camera, you want to click the little button to open it up so that you get all the color wheels and all the saturation and everything else that is all in front of you, so that you can sit there and have a lot of control over the tweaking. So, I mean, when you think, there's not that many colors you can't get to in the switcher. If I, let me show this real quick just to make sure we're on the same page here. Oh, I can't do it. So this is what I have opened on mine. So you can see this is when I close this, when I open it up here, I have a lot of control over, it's not just lifting the gamma gain or, gamma. You have most of the color that you need to get to can be done with these three wheels. It's just a matter of learning how to use them. So, that's all I would, say is to play with it. But to get any more detailed than that, I would say a LUT for one of the cameras. Next, we're going to talk about that more too. Next question.
Ruben Marchena of Grand Rapids, Michigan is up next with, what's the reason behind the ATEM Mini Pro having only a few streaming sites hard-coded in the system? If yours is not there, you need to mess with one and hope they do it right. And he has a note, can as a group, we suggest a better way?
Go ahead, Jason.
There are, in truth, only a few destinations that are available worldwide, and they do, for the most part, get those right. The first generation of this was really hard to modify, and since then they've added it into the app. If you ever have problems with this, I guarantee post something in Discord and one of us can help you.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Does the ATEM Mini allow for the same sort of upload of profiles the way that the streaming bridge does? So that instead of messing around on the device, you go into the software and just upload the specifications?
Absolutely.
Well, that would be a fairly easy way to do it then.
Yep. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, this Livestream Touch Director app is worth its weight in gold for this, because it just makes it super simple to pump those in. So it's just a copy and paste, and it's so much faster. I mean, I pay the $29 or whatever it costs just to make that go away. So that's my recommendation. Touch. That's why I own it. It's so handy.
That's awesome.
I'll put a link in the chat.
Absolutely. Next question.
Gregory Wheeler in Maryland says, anyone use Spotify's Anchor, and what are your thoughts about the service?
I haven't really used it much yet. So, I don't have any strong opinion about using it. I think Spotify's making a hard play. I think it's all good for us for Spotify to make the play towards that. I think that most people that are doing podcasting are still making the majority of their money on Apple, streaming to the Apple as an Apple podcast, in doing their own advertising, their own monetization. Jeffrey?
The only thing that some hardcore podcasters will tell you about is the control of the RSS feed when Anchor, and I haven't used it since Spotify bought Anchor, but when Anchor was there, you got to go through their infrastructure. So if you want to switch to another infrastructure, you will probably have some problems moving your files over. It's the only thing to look at that I can think of offhand.
Go ahead, Leland.
I was going to confirm that. I'm good friends with Todd Cochran, who happens to own Burberry, which is one of the largest podcasting companies alongside Libsyn and maybe Podbean. He's very adamant that Anchor's not really the place to go if you're a podcaster. If you like to play with audio, sure, go check it out, maybe to get your feet wet, but it's not a place to put all your stuff for real estate.
You can check in, but you can't check out. It's like Hotel California. Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville, Tennessee said ideas for showing or sharing song lyrics while viewing the person singing, playing guitar during Zoom. The goal is to encourage the audience singing along, and to encourage them, you need the bouncing ball.
I don't know of anything that does that. We've thought a lot about that. We were, there's a bunch of places you could go with that. The tricky part is using it. Is it going to follow you intelligently, or is it just going to kind of follow? Are you following it as well? So if you're following it as well, I mean, I feel like there could be a karaoke thing that would be able to, you could stream a karaoke interface out to the audience. The problem will really be is that there'll be a delay in the way they get it. So if you're doing it over Zoom, you're singing, enough ahead of them that they can't really sing together. That's the hard part with any singing together. If you watch us sing each other happy birthday, we're kind of
to sing happy birthday.
We're embracing the insanity that occurs shortly after we all try to sing together. So that's the challenge, is that they can. It's hard for them to. We haven't figured out a way for people to do choral, in Zoom yet. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, because our current method is we just have like a PowerPoint, with like one chorus and then one verse, and it's side by side with the person that we're listening to sing. I don't know if there was a better way. So,
well, the hard part again, if it's for their own enjoyment, are you talking about for a service, or are you talking about for what is it, like a church service, or is it something else that they're singing along with?
Similar to that, yeah.
Yeah. So, because if it's for them to participate and you're not sending their video back, then you could absolutely do so I would say I would probably think about some kind of karaoke. I don't know how to program the karaoke. I just know how to, you can get popular songs, but if you're doing your own, that might be a little bit more challenging. It's an interesting thought though. I'll think about that some more. Leland?
There's a few apps out there. I was just turned on to one by a friend of mine in the DJ industry, and I'll get a link to that real quick. Another is Karafun, Karafun, is a software app that you can do not necessarily bouncing text, but you can get a little graphical with some of the animations of it, I believe, and that's something to look into. You create your own video and then add the overlays of the text as a text file and play with it after that.
Sorry, my brain went into like how to do this. I'll think about that some more. It's a cool idea. Jeffrey?
If these are not originals, if they're originals, then you're going to have to do it through some sort of third-party setup like Final Cut or something like that. But if these are covers, then there is a website called karaoke-version.com. And what they do, and Victor and I both use these, you can actually get stems of each track, and you can pull out all the stems because there's another stem that also gives you a click track. And then they also have karaoke versions of the songs. So then you could put the lyrics down on the bottom corner. You couldn't change how the lyrics move or play on the song. You really have to go with what's conformed there. But then you could use that and then the click track to go along to play.
I think that one of the things that'd be interesting to do is from a video perspective, people just following along if they're not trying to sing together, is you could probably build a series of behaviors in either Motion or build it in Motion and take it into Final Cut as a plugin. And you can have it so it bounces or the ball's there, and all you have to do is set the points of when it goes to the next word, and it would just animate. Like it would have a behavior that it did to get to the next one. And it would take, you still have to put the words in, and then you still have to animate them, but it wouldn't be like you animating an arc. It would be like you just setting points of where that word shows up, and it would be pretty fast to go through. And then what it would do is you're building the behavior of how it gets from one to the next. There should be an app that does this, but that might be a way to actually muscle through it. It would probably take you an hour a song to do it, is my guess, to get it in there.
Auto tune for video.
Yeah. Next question.
Chris Widener of Lafayette, Indiana, says, I had a friend who owns a restaurant ask me about replacing his static gobo with a LaserCube W2W. I've done a lot with projection, but not lasers, and it seems like this would be a bad idea. But thoughts?
lasers are cool. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I once went to an NBA All-Star game or something like that, and they were using a lot of laser projection in the concourse. It was in Phoenix, and where the Suns play, and so they had a lot of money to throw at the problem. So there are, with the correct aiming and things like that, it doesn't have to be necessarily dangerous to project a logo onto a floor, which they did a lot, animated logos, or onto a fixed wall in a circumstance where you're sure that people are not going to be staring into your lasers a lot. So there are solutions. They're just not cheap.
Next question.
Moving on to Jonathan J's question, no place given. I've had issues with high motion video breaking up while streaming. Looks better on some platforms than others. For example, Vimeo versus Dacast versus On2. Any suggestions or thoughts?
The tearing is typically a function of running out of temporal capacity. So most of the streaming has a limit, some kind of constant bit rate is what we call it. So you have 6 megs or 4 megs or other things like that. And so the problem you get into is that when it runs out of that data, it will start to tear because it just it can't build those frames and stay inside of the bit depth or the bit rate that it was given. So you can see tearing in a lot of different things. Where that really becomes more problematic is a lot of motion in front of a lot of detail. So when you have a lot of detail in the frame, it's one of the reasons that we like short depth of field is because short depth of field blurs out the background and makes less detail, which makes it's less of a load for the encoder. The other thing is that they have to make decisions very quickly. The closer to real time that you get, so low latency, all those things actually reduce its ability to really look at those frames and make intelligent decisions. And so real time, the closer to real time you get, the more tearing you're going to get. Generally, you can get without a ton of detail, you can get a fairly large amount of motion inside of something that has, let's say, 15 or 20 seconds of latency. As that resolution gets larger, you're more likely, again, it's more data. So the larger the buffer size as well, the better it's going to be as far as stalling or tearing that you might see there. So those are the things that kind of affect it. It's really just the bit rate problem. If you send enough bits down the path, you can get a lot of motion in there. If you reduce the background or the foreground detail, it gives you more room to just spend it on something else, resolution, motion, those types of things. One of the things that's kind of the cutting edge of this right now is the experimentation of resolution versus quality. So, some of the stuff that people are talking about is we might scale down the image and give you a softer image that works better, that doesn't have as much macro blocking, that doesn't tear, that doesn't, when we don't have enough bandwidth. So there's a lot of experimentation in this area, but it's all dealing with, you just have a very specific budget to work with. But and all these different tools use different ones. Like On24 is a good example. They really are designed to work inside of corporate networks. And as a result, their frame size tends to be smaller and their compression tends to be higher because it puts less pressure on the corporate network. The result of that is that it looks like poop. so anyway, so that, that's the problem with On24. I don't even know a way to say it than that. So Vimeo is going to tend to be better, but it's going to put more pressure on your network. So when you put a large frame into a large corporate network where a lot of people might be watching it in the same building, you have to figure out how you're going to do peer-to-peer. So that can be using something like Hive or Workplace or Contiki. It's not Contiki anymore. It's Collective. Are ones that use peer-to-peer distribution or multicasting. Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I'm going to support everything Alex is saying in the corporate world, because I remember going in to talk to one of my corporate clients about putting video on the net, and the guy looked at me and he goes, "Do you realize that every night we're polling like 10,000 cash registers, and this affects our stock price? Do you think we're letting you put videos into our network for that kind of stuff?" Not
Stuart,
happening.
real quick. We got like a minute to do the other two.
Yeah, just don't forget that the frame rate is important when you're setting how the motion's going to look. The little hidden nasty bite that we all cop is that the codecs work at a number of bits per second. If you increase the frames, you're spreading those bits out across the frames. A smaller number of frames will give you smoother motion between the frames than having not enough bits for a good frame in the first place.
Yep. Next question.
DJ Asher of Minneapolis says, for Guy, maybe will the Smallrig cage for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K fit the new version of the same camera?
Guy.
It will not. It's physically larger. When we unboxed it, I had my son, and there's an unboxing video in the Discord. I was surprised how much physically bigger it is. So it will definitely not. But the flip out screen is amazing, especially for just walk around in the ND shot. And the ND is nice for those clouds and things that you want to be able to capture that detail. I had it at the Max, the ND6, and I was pulling in detail. I was like, yes, this is so much more convenient than where's my ND filter? Screw the 4 on, screw the 2 on. So yeah, it's a gorgeous camera. I had to give it to the next guy, but we have one in house to play with. So if anybody's in Seattle wants to play with one, we have one to play with.
Next question.
Michael Vosby in Woodstock, Georgia has our last regular question for today. What is the best software to control exposure on Logitech's 920 series through the Brios? They all seem to be lacking in terms of the software.
Manual camera and webcam settings on the Mac will give you all the controls that are available via the UVC platform. So if they look lacking, like, oh, I don't have that control, that's because that protocol doesn't support anything else. So they just expose all the dials that are there. So that's the so if you think it doesn't have it, it's just because it's a very simple protocol that we've pushed much harder than it was designed for. So I think you get the best you're going to get out of those two on the Mac. On the PC, I think it's not a lot of good options. I don't know none of them have been particularly good. I think the Logitech's own capture software on the PC is pretty close. Anyway, so now we're going to shift gears a little over. Sorry about that. And so we're shifting to audio, and we're going to talk about audio chains, but not, I don't want to limit it necessarily to analog audio chains, but really just how we get audio back and forth between different devices. So if you're, a lot of our audio engineers here, if you have things you want to say that are important, I'm just going to start riffing a little bit, and then we'll jump into questions. So if you have questions about this, about audio chains, go ahead and throw them into Makana. If you have things that you think are important for people to think about, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll start moving forward. Go ahead, Mickey.
I think like the most important thing when you're talking about, chains and connections between devices is gain staging. And without proper gain staging, everything else you do doesn't matter.
Well, do you want to explain gain staging?
So essentially that is making sure that the output that you're sending matches what the input of the receiving device is expecting, and vice versa.
Well, and in some ways you could say that device number 2's output is the same as device number 1's, right? At Unity, right? So when you're, I mean, the way I think of it when I put my slider at, my fader at 0 or Unity, the big fat line, as I tell the kid I'm teaching, when it's there, the output coming out of that is going to be the same as the output coming in from the thing above it. So if I set tone at -16 or -18, that input is going to come out the other side at the same level as it came in. So it's passing it through. So, and that's why you set your pot to Unity, and then you change your gain, right, to get it so that both outputs are the same, right, Mickey?
Yeah, assuming that the second device, whatever processing it may be doing, is in bypass, or
right.
If you're just setting it directly through, then everything should line up.
Right. Go ahead, Greg, and then Michael.
No, I was just gonna say, effectively, if Unity gain takes all the electronics out of everything, and it's almost like a cable going straight through that piece of gear. So. And yes, that is the way to line stuff up. And it is correct to set your fader first, and then your gain.
Right. Well, and then the goal is to get it all the way.
There could be some debate about that, but that's the way I've always done it.
That's the way. I mean, the way I set I put them all at Unity, and then I tweak all my gains, and the goal is that if you have 10 things going down the path, it comes out the end of the last one at the same level that it went in on the first one, and you're trying to match them all up all the way through. Go ahead, Michael, and then Tyler.
That's exactly true in analog. It is not true in digital. In digital, you have to set the gain first, because digital needs that reference. It needs the full signal. Okay. And even with the fader, once you've got it on that input channel, you really want to leave that alone as much as possible. You want that going to a group or a subgroup, okay, So you can control the actual audio level, but not lose the bit rate of the digital signal. You understand what I'm getting at?
Tyler? Well, your gain is very low.
Muted low. Zoom
Sounds like an interconnect problem, huh?
His mute is very high.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been running into issue with is if you have a bunch of hardware units, say like a mixer, a processor, and then an active monitor with an amplifier built in, typically you know that all these units are either +4 dBu sensitivity. But if you want to maximize the dynamic range of multiple units, you need to know what the maximum output and the maximum input in dBu is for each of those units. But what I've been finding is that most of these active speakers will only list the sensitivity and not the maximum input level, making it almost impossible to maximize your dynamic range. And then secondly, when it comes to setting input gain, what I've found is that like Robert Scoville, a really popular mixer for Tom Petty, he recommends that you set your input based on -18 RMS. So that way it's kind of a fine line of what your average signal is without peaking. And so I know it's two different things, but
like we got to go ahead, Tim, and then Brian, and then Mickey. This is gonna be. We might spend the whole hour on gain stage.
Oh, we could spend
which is totally
hours
fine.
on this.
Which is totally fine. Go ahead, Tim.
I think the main thing to take part of what's how your mixer or other devices actually display their level. And for a lot of things, it used to be 0 VU, which was corresponded to a specific voltage into a particular impedance. Now almost everything digital is dB full scale. And for a lot of devices, the equivalent of analog 0 dB VU is approximately -18 dB full scale. Approximately, depends on how hot the output of the actual device is. And getting back to something Tyler just said that kind of caught my ear. In the old analog days, we would do send a square wave through devices and determine at which point the input would clip and at which point the output would clip. And we would match the levels so that everything clipped at the same time. This first gave you honest metering at the front end on your console. And it meant that anything over a certain point meant that everything was clipping throughout your signal chain. So it also had the side benefit of keeping your noise floor as low as possible. And that also gets back to something that Michael Fraley just said about, you need every bit. I disagree that for audio, you need every bit now that we have 24-bit words. But if you don't, you will be laughed out of the classroom by your peers because that's what every device is expecting.
Brian?
Yeah, and speaking of gain stage here, I have to check this out because I swapped out mics. But the big thing that nobody's talking about is digital attenuation as well. So like if say if I'm on tour with a band and we're multi-tracking every night because they're going to do a live DVD or CD or whatever it is, a lot of the studio guys will want hot levels, going to Pro Tools. So I'll actually kick the head amps up and then bring the attenuation down on the desks. And also all the desks sound different with how you hit the mic pre as well. So sometimes you'll find that sweet spot and then use the digital attenuation to get it in the spot where you need it. So that's my 2 cents.
Good. Mickey and then Marty, and then Courtney. Sorry, Courtney, you're up in the corner for me. Sorry for that.
Yeah, as Greg mentioned earlier, like gain staging, there's especially in digital, it's
religious.
For,
the religious
for a lot
wars.
of debate. Yeah, but yeah, I don't feel the need to, as Tim just mentioned, I don't feel the need to fully maximize the dynamic range in digital because of 24-bit. I don't need to be like right by the reds every single time, but of course that depends on the source. But yeah, I get the point of bringing it down in groups or probably in your master, but that just gives you, I'd rather get my input trims as close as possible to what the mix would actually sound like without having to push that too hard.
Marty?
If you're looking to, if you're stringing together a power amp and speaker chain, then I think Tim's a suggestion about looking at where the clip points are works very well, because that will maximize your gain for every different system. If you're, but for the entire chain, including preamp level, the crest factor of the signal is important. So how peaky is the signal? If you're working with very compressed material to begin with, you can bump up the preamp gain because you don't need that much headroom. But if you're talking about speech or percussion or something that has a lot of peak material, then you need to lower your gain because you'll have a lot more, you'll need a lot more headroom.
Courtney?
Well, 32-bit float has kind of been a game changer on recording now, so you don't have to worry as much about hitting the high end on your 24-bit dynamic range. And if you're doing digital interconnects, settle on a common bit depth and sample rate, and make sure everything is set to that bit depth and sample rate, and tie into word clock if you can for all of your digital equipment, so that you have a common word clock across all of your equipment, so everything stays in precise sync if you're using AES or SPDIF or anything like that for digital interconnects.
Can you explain word clock for folks?
A word clock is a signal. It's kind of like blackburst for video, so it's a common sample rate word clock that sends out a signal at the beginning of each word, so that your samples stay in sync. So the beginning of a word on one word is the group of bytes that indicates a sample, and so that the beginning of the word on lines up between each piece of equipment, so one's not picking it up slightly delayed halfway through a word, so it's picking up byte 2 and 3 instead of byte 1, which it should pick up, so it keeps everything in sync.
Good. Greg?
Okay, and the whole thing about headroom, and this is why in dB full scale we don't have any positive numbers. It's all negative numbers, and that's accounting for the extra headroom that would be +0 on the VU side. Okay, so all those numbers that you can't see on the top of the VU, we're now accounting for those in dB full scale. And the way I heard it was that as long as you're recording above or hitting approximately at the reference level, you're using all your bits. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it was the point about everybody was talking about, because it's digital, you have to under record. I believe that to be totally false. There's no point at recording at -30. It's not getting you anywhere.
Well, and the problem is that to your point, as you record in that lower level, you're allowing everything to fall into your noise floor. There's inherent noise that's going through the systems, and at the lower you're lowering that, you're getting into that noise floor, and then when you have to re-stretch it back out, you're basically pulling all that noise back out of the system. And it's one thing. The most common place we see this is wireless mics, and for us anyway, is people won't have enough power coming out of the receiver. So the receiver's getting, it's either the transmitter or the receiver is at a lower rate than it should be. And then we end up gaining it up. And then you end up with a lot of hiss, going through the system. And so it's important to make sure that those are, obviously not peaking, but that we have proper dynamic range in those areas to reduce that noise that we're pulling out of it. That's just there, but we make it more present because we're having to pull it up somewhere else. Go ahead, Mickey. And then Brian, and then
yeah, I think like if you're at the point that when with wireless mics, if you're at the point that when you gain up for your mix, or when you start to compress stuff, if it's bringing up the noise floor way too much that it's starting to be a problem, then there might be something wrong with the gain staging. Like it might be coming in too low somewhere earlier in the chain, then it's being brought up later. But with definitely, like, I don't know what you're talking about in terms of the levels that you mentioned, Greg. Are you mentioning like peak values, or are you talking about RMS or VU? Because that would vary greatly. And like for me, like when I'm recording ISOs on shows, I'm usually running at the VU at or somewhere around -30, but my actual mix that I'm sending out to everyone else is riding along -20, -16, somewhere there. It's my mix is a lot hotter than the ISOs that I'm recording to give that extra headroom.
Yeah, that's okay.
Brian.
Yeah,
Brian
well,
and
and
then
just
Michael.
going on onto your wireless discussion, Alex, I always run my receivers at line level as well, hitting a Rio or whatever console you're running, and that really helps a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Michael.
Yeah, I agree with Brian. Usually, if you've got a problem with your wireless on something like that, the switch in the back of the unit is in the wrong position.
Well, and I just mentioned it because it's something that we have to fix a lot. You know, like it's like to your point, I want to get to line level as fast as I can. You know, like the mic level is good for the mic, but as soon as I can get it out of mic level into line level is where we want to get to, because it's going to transport better.
The other thing I wanted to say is, and you've brought this up before, Alex. Good enough shouldn't be good enough. Don't buy into that attitude. With digital bit rate, get every bit you can. Okay. Oh, that's good enough is never going to sound as good as full brilliant quality. Okay. You can always compress. You can always take something that's full and bring it down. But by taking something that's less than and trying to pump it back up, you're raising the noise floor. You're adding, what is it called? What artifacts? You're adding artifacts to your signal that are unnecessary. Why do it?
Right. Well, and part of the reason we're having this discussion is to really for us to kind of nug through and figure out the best ways to handle this, because to your point, you know, you never finish a project, you just run out of time. You know, like so you know, like you just run out, like, okay, we're not going live, and this is as far as we got today. And so when I tweeted out that, you know, good enough is the enemy of great, it didn't mean that good enough shouldn't exist. It just meant that it was the enemy of great. You know, so there is, you know, we're going to get this far, but you always want to know that you can fall into good enough and you'll never get great if you keep on going back to it. So it's that you should always look at good enough as a necessary evil. That is, we're going to get to this point today. But if you give us any time, you know, we're always trying to shave off whatever that last little bit is between us and great. Like every show, we're just like trying to figure out how to, okay, that didn't turn out perfectly. And there's nothing wrong. I used to have a sign on my in my office that said "Mind the Gap," and what I meant by that was from London, but it had "Mind the Gap," and that's meant to be like stepping from the tube train to the sidewalk. But for me, it's never stop looking at the gap between where you are and perfect. Like, you know, you mind that gap all the time. You know, and so this show and what we do is should be always trying to close that gap, and being okay with the fact that you'll never get to it. Like you'll never get to perfect, but you want to keep on figuring out, like, and us discussing it and us working on it is always minding that gap. Ed, and then somebody else over here, Ed, and then Marty.
Talking to the point Brian made with those wireless microphones and what you kind of talked about, Alex, with always bringing those things to line level. Yeah, get things to line level as quick as you can. But, you know, we're blessed with having professional gear. You know, Brian mentioned a Rio. For maybe the people who are working these corporate gigs with these old Mackie mixers and things like that, you have to understand what your input is. So coming out of that receiver, if you're going into an XLR input that isn't padded or doesn't have a pad, you might have to convert that to the TRS input on those old analog mixers. That's where there's a resistor, to knock that line level down to what a switch that gives it takes it from the mic preamp that you're going to overload. You don't want, you know. So again, gain staging is getting the optimal level to avoid your noise, to reduce your noise floor. You want gain, you know, above your noise floor, but also you have to mind the matching of inputs and outputs, as Mickey had said earlier. You know, you don't want to send line level to something that is expecting a mic level in. I mean, early in the pandemic, we saw it all the time with the ATEM Minis and getting audio into them. And that's, you know, exactly the thing. Those aren't designed to take a +4 dBu, as someone had brought up earlier, you know, as a professional line level input. Those are a unbalanced line level input that's closer to consumer grade, consumer line level. So keeping those things in mind, you know, hard and fast rails, I just always going to line level. I worked at a shop that had a ton of those Mackie mixers that went into breakout rooms, and everyone who always clicked them over to line level, our ULXDs, they're, wow, why is my mic why are these mics distorted? They stink. They're terrible. No, it's you have to understand what you're sending to, what it can take, and what you're actually sending out. And that's what I think about when I think about gain staging, is looking at all of those pieces in the chain, and, you know, matching impedances and levels between your pieces.
Yeah, Marty, and then Tyler, and then Greg, and then Mickey.
Yeah, that's very true. Having to watch the difference between mic level and line level. I had a few years ago, I rented a couple of auto mixers, the old Shure auto mixers, to a professional sound guy who was doing a video shoot, and he came back and just complained about them. They were awful, awful, awful. There just wasn't enough gain. He had the volumes turned up all the way, and it just didn't work well. And then I looked at them, and they were switched to, you know, the wrong level. But Alex, you mentioned minding the gap. That's very interesting. I run into, you know, I'm always talking to non-professional people who are doing sound in either corporate or church, especially, that, you know, where they feel like they have a very forgiving audience and they just don't need to pay that much attention to, or invest, or learn, and it's
So they
like,
can,
you know,
and what I'll say is, so they can go back to Twitter, or they can go back to doing something else. And like, why would you do anything that you couldn't do excellently? Like when I really started thinking about this, I was working in Japan, and I had this moment where I was at the airport, or going to the airport to go to Japan for 6 weeks or whatever. And I went to a 7-Eleven in San Francisco, and the guy would barely pay attention to me, and he just kind of threw the money at me my change at me. And then I got on then I got my stuff, and I went on a plane, and I landed. And that night I went to a 7-Eleven in Japan. So same brand, but now I'm in Tokyo. And this guy like presented my change, like boom, like, you know, like just presented, you know, like opened it up and handed it to me like it was a ceremony. And I realized he's doing it every time for every person. He's doing it that way, because in Japan, you know, I was talking to someone about it, one of the film crew that I was working with, and he just said, because there's no reason to do anything if you're not going to do it well. And it never stuck, you know, like, if you're not going to, like, why not? If you're getting paid to be there, why, if you're spending the time there, it's so much more to the Japanese culture. It was so much more enjoyable to be good at what you do, no matter what it is, you know. And I think about that when I think about how I cut my onions and how I cut my mushroom. Like, it's all like, how do I make that technique just a little bit better everywhere, everything that you do? And we get into this thing, like, we want to have a little extra time to do something so that we can, I don't know, waste away our lives, you know, with something, rather than using every moment. Like, to me, when you look at a mixer, especially at a corporate gig or an educational gig or something, that's your opportunity as an individual to understand that art, you know, and you get to do it over and over and over again, instead of just turning it on, you know. And it's just a lost opportunity when you have all that time to get really good at something. Go ahead, Tyler, and then Greg. I think we had Tyler, Greg, and then Mickey.
Yeah. So going back to gain staging, Robert Scoville, in this one video I was speaking about, talked about how, number one, you need to know in a digital mixer what type of meters you have on your console. Are they DBFS? Some are VU, some are RMS. I think the console he works with pretty proficiently is the Venue, or
the S6L, I think.
Yeah. And so that's the one part. Then he recommends setting your input gain to -18 RMS, and then not running your faders at 0 dB, and using audio subgroups. So that way, when the volume is attenuated within the console, you're preserving as much of the audio signal for the bit depth. So I think that the subgroups in the console he uses are probably a VCA, like a voltage controlled amplifier, instead of a DCA. So that way you're preserving as much bit depth when attenuating the volume of your channels within the mixer. So does anyone else like, can you speak into that?
Good. Greg and then Mickey.
No, it doesn't quite sound, logical to me, but I don't know. I'm just wondering, at what point do we know when we're using our full amount of bits? Is there some magic level?
Well, and hopefully this is the beginning of a discussion where, I see this as there's another second hour somewhere where we get a bunch of tools to look at this, and we all just sit down and look at a bunch of scopes and we push a bunch of stuff through it and we talk and we look at it. I mean, I think that what I hope to do more in some of these hours, whether it's with video or audio or other things, is us actually measuring stuff together and discussing it, looking at what we're looking at and experimenting with this process. Because what we're doing, a lot of us, what we're doing is good enough, and how do we become absolutely the best in the world at it and understand when is there enough bits and does it matter and whether it impacts it and how does it sound. And so this is just an exploration of that today. And we'll keep on exploring it.
I was going to say, and Alex, we could answer every audio question like this.
Yeah,
we could start out that way, because every mixer has a different style. Every mixer has found things that work for them. Right. So it's constantly back and forth, and that's the beauty of it. I love these things.
Yeah. Mickey, and then Michael, and then Jason.
Yeah, I think I opened the can of worms when I said the gain staging.
So here's the funny thing is that when I wrote it, I was thinking I was going to make a whole talk about gain staging, but I wasn't sure if we could do gain staging for a whole hour. So I said, connecting.
Learn we can do it for a day.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm fine with talking about gain staging because I assumed it was gonna go down this path. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I think what is mentioned earlier about -18, lining up your input trims at -18, is that DBFS? Is that VU? I think with DBFS,
RMS.
that's definitely. Yeah, RMS of what? Of the
RMS of that particular console is what he was getting at. He's using S6L and
okay,
using
that's
RMS.
most likely digital.
Right.
Because I think that's way too little headroom for at least some sources. If you're talking about -18 relative to full scale. But
where can I post a link to this video?
I'm
in
Mukana.
But in which section?
In which audio general? Audio general, or watch this. But yeah, in terms of that, I think that is more of a mixing style. I think like using groups to bring the mix down is a little bit of, at least personally, that's an inefficient way of using groups, because depending on what you're mixing, you'll have hundreds and hundreds of groups. But again, like what Greg said, it depends. Everyone has their own style of mixing, and at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it's good. And just going back to the discussion earlier about wireless systems, your preamp is actually at the transmitter side of things. That's, I think, one thing that people oftentimes forget, that the microphone level signal that's coming from the handheld mic or your lavalier or whatever it may be has to be brought up to line level for the transmitter to actually do its thing. So keep in mind that the preamp is on that end, and you don't want that nice robust line level to be brought back down to mic level on the receiver side and later down in the chain. So you want to be able to keep that robust signal all the way through, so you're not, every time you bring stuff up, you're also bringing up the system noise. So you don't want to bring it up to line level, bring it down, to mic level again, and then
Yeah, you
lift
never want to go down
everything
and up.
back up to line.
When you think about it visually, if you were thinking about it as in Photoshop, it'd be like taking your curve and moving it all the way down here and then pulling it back up again. Now you've got a lot of bits that you can get away with that a little bit, but it's in comparison, but you're obviously throwing information away when you do that. And that gets back into maximizing the digital quality, is that you're going to lose that data, or if it's an analog, you're going to get more noise, just from the components. Go ahead, Michael, and then Jason.
On the wireless, keep in mind too, there are settings in the microphone for your gain.
Right.
Okay. So, if you're having a gain issue with it, check that. Somebody may have messed with it and bumped it up or bumped it down, that you can't, you're not getting what you need. Number one. Number two, and really, instead of going into a long dissertation about this, I would encourage everybody to watch Mr. Scoble's
we should just get him on
video on here.
Why don't we just get him on? Let's get Mr. Scoble on. We'll talk to him directly.
Because it explains exactly why he's doing that. It's not necessarily a mixed preference thing. It is a way, it's an ecosystem of controlling the signal properly from beginning to end in a digital world. Okay. It's not about, oh, well, I prefer groups or I prefer VCAs and that kind of, it's not about that at all. It's about proper structure for a digital signal beginning to end.
Right. And the big thing also is if you're swerving hard any direction, you're probably overcorrecting somewhere. One of the things that I teach our guys, and I don't know if this is accurate, you guys can tell me, but from my experience, I just say 11 to 2. If my gain is between 11 and 2, I feel okay. 11 p.m. and 2 p.m. I won't go quite to 10 a.m., but 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Like I was like think there, if I go over 2 p.m. or below, really 10, you're right, the 10 a.m. But in that little area, if I go one way or the other, something's wrong. Like I immediately, I won't always not do it, but I will look at that is like a big red flag to me, is that if I'm turning it up too high, my gain up too high or down too low, there's something wrong. Like, and I'll just tear apart my whole audio chain to figure out what's missing there, because if it's not like rocking in the middle there's something off somewhere else as it goes through. Go ahead, Jason, and then Tim.
Yeah. I know we all like to get lost in the weeds sometimes, and it is fun to have those kind of deep discussions. I was just wanting to bring it up to a higher level and think about gain structure and gain staging and concepts. So understand concepts of signal to noise ratio, analog, digital, plug-in, what have you, and headroom. What is the headroom of your gear, and how does your gear interpret those? Whether it's a meter you're looking at, is it line level, mic level? What's the whole chain doing as it goes through?
Yeah, and I would recommend thinking about, like, that's why I'm so addicted to audio, different audio meters. Just digital audio meters, whether it's Sonic Atom or I use Spectre. There's other things that you can use because you can see so much detail. Like those little what you get on your mixer or VU meters, to me is that's cute. But what I really want to see is everything. Spectrograph. I look at a lot. I'm watching a lot of you on a monitor that all I see is a spectrograph of every person talking. And I'm slowly figuring out what I like and don't like about different mics based on me looking at the spectrograph while people are talking in office hours. Go ahead, Tim.
I think I just took my Vulcan mind eraser. It's completely gone. I'll come back with something later.
Okay, very good. All right. Next question.
Let's jump actually our first question.
This is first question. Next question. It only took us 40 minutes to get there. Yeah,
there you go. But we had a great time getting there.
Yeah.
David Brady of New York says, a new to audio. Can somebody please explain a mix minus in layman's terms? Can it be done in software such as Loopback or Audiometer Banana?
Go ahead, Jason.
A mix minus is a mix minus your input. So a mix minus for me would be every program audio less what I'm saying. Alex's mix minus would be program audio minus what Alex is saying. Can it be done with Loopback? Absolutely.
And it's typically done with a bus, a separate bus, so the problem is you need a separate bus for every person that needs a mix minus. So they're getting the program audio, and then in that bus minus, you just pull down their contribution to that program for their bus that it goes back to them. Go ahead, Marty.
Oh yeah, I was just you kind of did it for me. I was just, imagine an analog console, and you have 3 people in the studio and 1 person calling in on a phone, right? And so you have 1 bus, 1 aux bus from your console feeding back to the phone. So on that bus, you would mix every person in the studio to go out the phone, but the input channel that has the phone on it would not get mixed into that bus. So they're just hearing the people in the studio and any other playbacks and things that you want the person on the phone to hear. Now, if you have 2 people on the phone, then you need a second bus, and you do the same thing. Now, with the exception that the first person on the phone would get fed to the second person on the phone, but the second person on the phone would not hear himself.
Right. And so it's one of those things. It's really hard to describe it, and once you understand it, you just go, oh, it's mix minus. It's not like, it doesn't get confusing other than knowing, like, when you have 8 people that need to have their own mix minuses, or the one that gets really harder is video mix minus, which we do, and that one is much more complicated just because of how you have to route it. Tim, and then Mickey, and then Tucker.
On mix minus, I've done that on panel discussions where we've had the panels in separate parts of the room. It was actually a State Park Directors Association thing where we had tables with 8 speakers and 3 microphones. The people at each table could hear each other acoustically. So they got a mix minus. What they got was a feed of the other, in this case, I think it was 6 tables. They got the other 5 tables' microphones fed to them. And so each table only did not have their own inputs because they could hear each other. It also reduced feedback and echoes and other problems in the room. And this was actually for a live event, but the same principle applies if you're streaming.
Yeah, and because most of what I've done in the last decade has been everyone is somewhere else in the world from each other. Our whole world is mix minuses. It's just like that's it's all you think about. And by the way, the one that I haven't tested, it'd be interesting to hear if anyone tested, is the Blackmagic in the switcher technically has mix minus. So if audio is embedded in different cameras on the input, it will automatically do the mix minus in the same return channel. So if you go back to return to let's say a computer with the same input or output as you used at the input, it'll mix minus out of that if you turn it on, which is pretty cool. Mickey, and then Tucker.
Yeah. Just going back to the question, David's asking if it could be done with loopback or audio meter. With loopback is more of a routing tool than a mixing tool, and I would say you could probably get away with doing 1 or 2 mix minuses on there. But once you build up to more than that, you'd probably want to have an actual mixer interface of either software or hardware, because you want to be able to react quickly to things, especially during a live situation.
Go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, one of the really important things to remember when using loopback, I was just going to tag on to what Mickey was saying, is that the way that the interface works, you're dragging cables and lines, and so you don't get a nice matrix view where you can be quick about it. And being quick about it and keeping it clear in your head is really, really important. Another place it gets really complex is when you do mix minus to groups. So like, for instance, in Zoom, you may have 4 participants in one room that need a mix minus, and remembering that all 4 of those people are one input. And so and then also when you need a switch. So if you're getting this mix minus right now, but then when you're live on air, you need a different mix minus. So it gets real complex real fast.
Go ahead, Jason, real quick, and then we'll move on.
I'm going to build on top of what Tucker said. I'm going to say something stupid first. You cannot unmix audio. So, for example, if you are bringing something in from a mixer and it's already mixed, you can't subtract it ex post facto. So, yes, you can use loopback, assuming that the source you want to mix minus is on the computer that's running loopback. Yes, there are ways around that, but I don't want to get into it.
Next question.
Moving to James Babbitt in San Diego, who says, for better sound quality on Zoom, is there a low-cost solution for a stationary mic instead of a pile head-worn unit?
Plenty. Lots of them. Go ahead, Tim.
Anything you can get close enough to the speaker and cover any objectionable aesthetic issues like having a mic in the shot or not. And then get it into your computer, or get it into the computer via USB if you can't get it in via analog.
One of the tricks that we have with much of office hours, and why office hours generally sounds pretty good, is that we've generally reduced the distance to mic to less than a foot for almost everybody. So the yeah, 6 inches, a foot. I mean, I'm trying to get us to a point where we all have, all of our mics are less than 6 inches away from our, because it's just, there's no way to replace, I don't care what anyone says, there's no way to replace proximity, as far as having a great vocal experience, or a great audio experience for people talking. Nikki, did you have something?
Just
No.
pointing
You were
to
just
the
moving
mic
your,
being-
pointing to the mic. Okay, next question.
Alan Scott of New Brunswick, Canada says, I'm thinking about connecting my Mac to my iPhone for Clubhouse type applications. I have an inexpensive USB adapter for my Pile mic. What attenuation do I need for the headset out to mic in for the phone? I'd prefer something in the same price range as the USB adapter, or a circuit designed to solder up.
I think all of us are trying to visualize that. That's a lot in text. I go ahead, Tucker.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that different applications grab hold of the audio in different ways on phones. And so some things expect, like Unity expects it to be a headset, like a calling headset. And that is a different operation than the operation for audio for listening. And also like USB audio interfaces that are compatible with phones are even a different set. So you have to be really cautious about, or at least cognizant of the fact that that is a thing, and make sure that whatever you wire up, you want to make it look like a headset to the phone. If it looks like a headset you can make a phone call on, that's what you're after.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I've been using a Saramonic device that I've had for a long time. It's 2 XLR inputs. It has phantom power versus via 9-volt battery. It terminates in an actual lightning connector that works with a phone. You can use a little splitter and also feed power to it at the same time. The reason I use this is because I just own a lot of XLR mics and I wanted to be able to play with them, and it works well on Clubhouse. The only thing I hate about the Clubhouse experience is they don't send you a mix minus. So generally when you're on Clubhouse, you can't hear yourself. This, like a lot of these kind of uses, has a little 1/8-inch mini plug so you can actually hear yourself, but then you can't hear Clubhouse because you're not hearing whatever device you're using to get on Clubhouse. So I normally have to use that with a set of headphones with a computer out in an earbud to get what I would consider to be a professional experience interacting with Clubhouse.
I mean, the main thing for me is that what I have found with Clubhouse is just and I'm just looking for it. I know it's over there, but I just don't know exactly where. Is the more you can get it to look like a headset, to get back to what Tucker was talking about earlier. I think Tucker was saying earlier, is that the TRRS is what you want your GAC to go into, because then I convert it to Lightning, because anything that just goes straight Lightning in Clubhouse, I think Bill's is working, but a lot of them just know that they won't be seen by Clubhouse. It'll just go, oh, I ignore that, because it thinks it was a digital device as opposed to a headset. So it does have to look like a headset to Clubhouse to make that work. And then I'm just using an analog cable that has an XLR in and a headphone jack out, and I can hear Clubhouse through the headphone jack, and I can go into the XLR in, and that XLR may need to get some it needs to come in line level. So I have to figure out something to get my mic up to line that. Now, again, what I'm using for Clubhouse is a Dante Bluetooth receiver. So it looks like Bluetooth, and then it comes out Dante, and then it goes into whatever I'm doing, and that works really well. Marty.
So I can't speak directly to Clubhouse, but it's important to remember that the headphone output on a computer is a stereo output, and it has an impedance that it's expecting to go to some kind of a speaker,
Right.
whether it be earphones or something else. So that stereo output needs to be converted to mono before you put it into the iPhone. And there are interfaces that will take audio into a phone device. You can get them from iRig or something, but make sure that you're choosing one that is not expecting a microphone level input. So anything, the iRig Pre, for instance, would not be the one to choose, because that's expecting a microphone. The output of the computer is at loudspeaker level or line level, close to it.
Go, Jason. And then Greg.
Yeah, I was gonna say I haven't tried Clubhouse, but one thing I have done to get audio in and out of it, like an iPad, is to use the Lightning to USB adapter from Apple. It'll also give you power to your device. And there's a product called Behringer UCA 222 USB audio adapter. It has RCA in and out, stereo in and out. You can also monitor via headphones there. I've had good luck with that if Clubhouse accepts that kind of input.
So what we found is that the Clubhouse, when it's a USB connection, it just goes nope. As soon as you turn it on to talk, you can hear stuff out of it, but as soon as you turn on to talk, it'll just immediately turn it off. Like it's because, and part of that I think is a protection scheme to keep you from recording the event. And so that's why, like the Bluetooth one I have, it just thinks it's a Bluetooth headset. It just looks like a Bluetooth headset to it, and then it converts it out. And you can do the same thing where you could theoretically also have IO with that Bluetooth, to another. Anyway, that's, to me, that's been the easiest one because the phone just sees it and it just turns on, and then and I don't have to plug anything in. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay, well, just rereading the question a little bit, it looks like he's trying to figure out how to get the Pile mic into his phone. Okay, so there's two issues, and I don't think we've addressed those. Number one is depends on his connector at the end of the Pile mic, and we're presuming that if he's from this group, that it's probably a little mini plug, a TRS, yeah. Okay, so he's got to make the TRS to TRRS conversion. And the second thing is power. Will the phone power it? I think it will. It won't.
I don't think so.
Well, see, then
I think getting that mic into that device, I think will be challenging. Let's go really fast to Courtney and then Jason, and then we'll go on to the next question because we're going to have to go into speed round now.
I don't know if anyone makes a Lightning to headset adapter, earphones and microphones, like a gaming headset adapter. But something like that then can be split out with a TRRS to dual TRS connectors, and you can plug the Pile into the microphone input on that and your headphones into the other input.
Yep. Jason?
Check out JK Audio's line of adapter, DAPTOR, and see if that helps.
Next question.
Tim Holm of San Lorenzo says, I'm purchasing an ATEM Mini Pro Extreme for our church. I need to get audio from our Allen & Heath SQ7 mixer into the ATEM. I have the outputs already matrixed out with XLRs. What is a good way to control levels between those outputs and still be able to moderate levels on the fly into the ATEM?
Go ahead, Ed, and then Tim.
Well, first, for getting into the ATEM, the thing I use is the Art CleanBox Pro. That takes those XLRs, knocks it down to that consumer line level we were talking about earlier for the ATEM in an unbalanced stereo TRS right in. And it does have a volume pot on it, takes wall wart power. So it can add gain. That's something to what we talked about very earlier is, calibrate your systems going from one to the other. But that's the, at that budget, ATEM and SQ7 kind of thing, the Art CleanBox at Pro at $80 is a good solution for doing those conversions.
Go ahead, Tim, and then Mickey.
You took my CleanBox Thunder. That's exactly what I'd recommend. The other thing is I suggest using one of the matrix, routing your left, right, or however the mix you're going to deliver to the stream, route that through your matrix. I think you have 3 stereo matrices on an SQ7. If you're not using them or all of them, dedicate 1 stereo matrix to that. That way you can insert dynamics and compression limiting only on that matrix. You can EQ that matrix separately if you have a lot of subwoofer information, very low information you would normally use in your live mix. That will not translate well into your streaming encoder. So you may want to EQ that out. So I would recommend using a matrix to route your signal. If you don't have an available matrix and still have an available stereo bus left on the console, if you're not using them all for IEMs or something for the band, you can use one of those and build your own discrete mix accordingly, and you would still have EQ and dynamics available on the output of that stereo mix.
Good. Mickey and then Tucker.
And yeah, just to add on to that, in terms of wiring, you'd want to keep the balanced connection, the XLR connection, as long as possible, and have the unbalanced connection from your DI, reverse DI box short as possible, because unbalanced connections can pick up a lot more noise which aren't canceled out like in balanced connections. And also, just to add, like if you can avoid running the audio directly into the ATEM, I would avoid that, just because the capabilities in the ATEM Mini aren't that great. So if you can put maybe an interface, even a relatively affordable one, right on your ingest machine computer, that would be a better route, in my opinion.
Tucker?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mickey. If you don't have to go through the ATEM, the SQ7 has every tool you need to make that sound really, really good. The only reason you would need it is if you were using like audio follows video functions. Tim made some fantastic points regarding the matrix. I would say if you're going to do that, you might consider taking a look at your master left right outs that feed your PA and making sure those are coming from another matrix as well. So you can do your system tune EQ on a matrix out, as opposed to, because if you do your system tune EQ on your left right bus and then that feeds a matrix, you're taking your pre-EQ'd signal for the room and feeding it to your record, and you definitely don't want that. I mean, it makes for really awkward sounding recordings or streams.
I just want to say that the audio day, Tuesdays and Saturdays are the most mature of our group of where we're trying to get to, where you can ask these questions and you get really deep answers, both in education and the other days we're working on, but the education but Tuesday, I'm always like, oh, Tuesday is the day to ask audio questions. All right, next question.
Well, this actually was my question, and it was a long time ago, 45 minutes ago. And I asked, as we move further and further toward 32-bit float operation and recordings, how much of these best practices will become irrelevant, if any of them will. And a nanosecond after I asked that, Courtney originally addressed it. So we've talked about it a little, so you may want to just gloss over it.
We'll go really fast. Go ahead, Tucker, and then Jason.
Yeah, just because you have that incredible level that you can work with and that you can bring something up from low, don't forget your rudiments. I mean, it's like learn pitter patter, learn how to get this stuff down, because you can, yeah, just because you can recover doesn't mean you should. Just because you can shoot in raw.
One of the things we learned when we're shooting in raw video, and when we process it into high dynamic range, for instance, is that you have to actually be way more technical, because now it's coming in and you got to figure out where it is in the space and then where you're going to bring it to and how you're going to compress it and what you're going to put out. So I think the 32-bit float is actually going to create a need for much more technical understanding of audio than the current situation, because in a live environment, it's great in a recording environment, because you just need to hit the side of the wall. Instead of hitting a little target, you just hit somewhere in that wall and you've got it. But I think that as we look at processing, which we're not doing right now, processing 32-bit float, I think you're going to get into a point where you just really have to really understand the audio and where it sits in the digital space and how you're going to process it to take it back out into something people can listen to. Courtney, and then Greg, and then Mickey.
And just remember, just because you have 32-bit float in the digital world, that you still have to gain stage, because you can overdrive the analog section before it gets to the A to D converter. So you got to make sure you're not saturating input transformers if you've got something old school that has transformers on the input, or the gain stage of the preamp. You're not overdriving the analog section of that before it gets to the A to D.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg, and then Mickey.
Okay, and last, at least for me, there is no free lunch. So we're moving more and more to an automatic society where everything, push a button and it's all there. But you're going to have a lot more work in post, because now post has to figure out all the things that you didn't figure out on production.
Mickey?
Yeah. More work in post. Okay, thanks, Greg. Yeah. This goes back, I guess, like in a way to like what Courtney mentioned, like say with wireless microphones, the preamp is in the transmitter. So even if later, like in your actual recorder, you're doing 32-bit float, if you mess it up on the transmitter side, doesn't matter. You're buried in noise, or you're saturating over there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I lost my train of thought. So
poop in is poop out, no matter how nice you put a ribbon around it.
Tucker and Tyler, real quick.
Yeah, just a reminder that at the further down from 0 you are, the less bit depth effective bit depth you're getting. You can turn 32-bit great. You can just give away half of that by just recording really low.
Yep. Yeah. Go ahead, Tyler, real quick, and then we'll move on. Nope. Okay, next question.
Ken Jordan of Epsom in the UK said, what is the best way, Alex budget, to connect a good mic, a Heil PR40 or something like that, for Zoom? Note, good XLR mic. As a side note, if you want to do a live test, I have a basic mixing console on a PR40 that I want to connect to Zoom.
Well, if you have a good mic, I think that the big thing is that you want to make sure that you have a good preamp. You know, I think that the preamp is the thing that's going, and then convert it to digital as fast as possible. So a great preamp. I mean, for me, obviously, I'm pretty attached to, for general live stuff, I'm pretty attached to sound devices stuff to connect to Zoom, whether it's a Mix Pre 3 or in my case is a little overboard because I've got a Scorpio here, but we used our general thing as a Mix Pre 3, and I think you're going to get a lot out of that mic if you process it correctly through that. Go ahead, Greg, and then Tucker, and then Michael, real quick though, because we're over time.
And any good quality interface, we'll do it for you. It's a really good sounding mic, and on its own it should be fine.
Go ahead, Tucker, and then Michael.
Yeah, whenever you're looking for interfaces, and I don't have one off the top of my head, but look for one that is effectively driverless, that you don't have to do any software messing with any, it's just you plug it in, it shows up as a sound card, turn it up, make sure it goes. The PR40 sometimes does require something like a cloud lifter, depending on depending on what the preamp is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Go ahead, Michael.
No, they've covered it all already.
I mean, the main thing you're also looking at is noise floor. Like the reason that I'm so attached to the sound devices stuff is the noise floor in the sound devices is like a negative 128 or something like that. It's just like way down into the nothing land. And so it's the noise floor of the, and if you're buying something much cheaper, you're not going to typically get that. That's the real issue. Go ahead, Tim, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, real quick. It's preamps are actually old school things. A straight wire with gain was figured out about 50 or 60 years ago. I don't think it's necessary to have a special esoteric preamp. What you need is to get the voltage output of the microphone up to what the next device in line wants to see. Some mics have notoriously low outputs. The SM7 sure is one of them. To a lesser extent, maybe the RE20. But if this goes back to Alex's earlier question, if you find yourself having to crank the input trim up on something, past maybe 2 o'clock-ish, chances are you're no longer in that sweet spot of that device. I would at that point work on maybe moving the microphone closer to the source rather than add another stage of electronics, which introduce another point of failure and additional noise.
Yep. Next question.
Ken Jones of Seattle back with, is there such a thing as a digital noise floor?
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey, real quick.
Yeah, this is just wanted to say this is a whole other hour of debate.
We'll save that. We'll save that for the next one. All right, next question.
Worms leave the can. Joshua Kuhn of Spartanburg, South Carolina says, currently using a lav on the panel after my EV had an unfortunate end of life. So sorry. For comparison's sake, anything out there other than the PR40 for around half an Alex or less?
Well, the PR40 is half an Alex or less. Tucker, and then Tim, and then Jason.
Reach out to EV. I would very, very seriously doubt that they wouldn't take care of you on that. They have a really good track record of send them the microphone. They'll say it's going to cost you $35 and they'll fix it. Don't quote me on the price, but they'll typically take care of you on those. Same thing with Shure. Same thing with almost every reputable mic manufacturer. Super short aside. Most microphones are developed and designed to work with between 30 and 40 dB of gain. And so if you are giving it more than that, you're positioning it incorrectly, probably.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
That's a total.
Sorry, wrong button. My desert island microphone, this came up in a discussion elsewhere, is the AKG C535. I think I own 8 of these back from when I was doing orchestra work. But this microphone sounds good on almost anything. And it comes with some selectable level outputs and high pass filters on it. And for about $250, it's a great mic you can use almost anywhere on anything. Out of my microphone vault, the CAD Equitech E100. This is the original, not the reissue. And this thing sounds wonderful. It also weighs 1.5 pounds and becomes a challenge on mic arms. But all of these come in. They now have a reissue of this that I think is under $300. And the original C3000, if you can find one that I'm using now, sounds a lot better than the reissue, I think. And even if you buy the reissue, they're $250. But the PR40 is a great mic.
It is just really good for a radio style broadcast because it's a lot of off-axis rejection for an average location. Jason, really fast, then we're gonna move on to the last question.
Okay, yeah, real quick, it's worth mentioning that Bob Heil makes other microphones and they're handheld and they are less expensive than this one and they're fantastic.
Next question.
John Idelson, our friend from Monterey, California, comes in with the last question. For people with old ears, I resemble that remark. How can we best monitor check audio? Sometimes I do not hear some of the high frequency sounds or noise.
Go ahead, Tucker.
Reach out to somebody younger.
That's what I thought the answer would be, hire a teenager.
So one of the things
moves his head.
What I'll say is that, again, this is where audio scopes really make a difference, is having a monitor open with audio scopes. Like, I don't trust, I do some color work, and I'm red green sensitive, or insensitive. And as a result, I depend very, very heavily on numbers. Like, I'm not looking at the colors, I'm looking at the numbers that I see. And because of that, I'm able to get oftentimes more accurate than a lot of people that are handing it to me because I can see stuff that they can't because I'm looking at it digitally. And so I think that you want to really, getting used to scopes, because you'll look at it, and when people, what you have to do is have somebody connect you to what you're looking at. And so that's the hardest part if you start now. But if for everyone, audio scopes, because what happens is when I look at someone, I don't like their mic in office hours, I look over at the spectrograph and I look at what it's doing. I look at the spectrogram, I look at the spectrograph, like when this person's talking, what am I seeing in my range? What am I seeing what does that look like? And I'm not there yet with office hours, but I'm getting to a point where I could probably look at it across the room and tell you who has a good mic and who doesn't without ever listening to anything. Like I could just look at it and just tell you how that audio sounds. Now down, obviously you want good ears, but I think that as we get less and less, we need to know how to use those tools. Go ahead, Marty, and then Mickey, Jason, Tucker, and this will be it.
Yeah, I love good meters. Meters can tell you a lot of things, and there are different.
I'm not talking about meters though. I'm talking about scopes.
Scopes, yeah, scopes.
Because meters will tell you a little. Anyway, go
right.
ahead.
But even scopes, we always say trust your ears and not your eyes. So my advice would be get a hearing test. I get a hearing test every 5 years or so that I know what I'm hearing, what I'm not hearing. And then once you have that information, you can actually do a system tuning on your desktop monitors. So you can sort of compensate for where your hearing losses are. You can do that in your headphones. You can do that in your speakers. And that'll give you a more accurate reference. Now, tuning up your speakers is always a good idea anyway, because your speakers are rarely ever flat in your room. So that's a good idea to do. And SonarWorks is one of the companies, there are others, that will actually provide you with a measurement microphone and software that will automatically calibrate your speakers to a flat response. And then you can dial in your own compensation curve to compensate for your own ears.
Good. Tucker, and then Mickey, and then Jason, and then Brian, and then we'll close it.
Yeah, I was just going to second what Marty said, and it really is know your deficiencies. Getting your hearing checked and know where that deficiency lies, and then if you are doing a tuning, just be careful that you don't overcompensate to the point where you just exacerbate the destruction that's happening.
Good. Jason, then Mickey, and then Brian.
No matter how good your ears are, your scopes will help you. No matter how good your scopes are, your ears will help you. So get both.
Yeah, Mickey.
I would say with scopes, you can see things, but I wouldn't trust. I wouldn't rely on scopes to make changes to something. You can probably fix a constant whine of some sort where you see a line, and you can do that visually. But I wouldn't make actual mixed decisions based on scopes.
And you're absolutely right. I don't make mixed decisions on it, but it lets me analyze it to make sure that I'm, I can see things that I can't see necessarily, or hear things that I can't hear, that can pop out. Because there's a lot of things like line buzz. I know to go look at that room because I can see a little line going across my spectrograph. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just one last thing on what Marty was saying, and this is like a whole nother week of talking, but Dr. Michael Santucci from Sensophonics, if you're familiar with that, in your monitor company, his whole world is that, and he's done so many years of research, that if your body actually will protect yourself from where you have frequency hearing damage. So actually putting that back in is actually, it doesn't help you at all. So it's very interesting, but that would be a whole nother discussion.
Good, Greg.
Yeah, I think it's easiest just to roll everything off at 8K and be done with it.
Transistor radios for the win.
Exactly. Why can't we just go back to AM? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for a great hour, a great couple hours. As always, somehow we pull out a good show every single day. It's all your fault, everybody here. The attendees had great I and the panelists had great answers, and it's just an amazing, like, again, this and the education hour, I think, are the two most mature, where I really look forward to Tuesdays, where I'm just like, oh, we're going to get into some deep, like, this isn't going to be like, oh, maybe you should use a phono jack. We're going to go deep. We may not come up with all the answers, but we're going to have a great discussion. And for those of you who are watching, and probably this is a little heavy for folks when we get into it, the goal is just to absorb what you can. You can always go back to it. I think that this is, we've been talking about this in the recent weeks, is that when we grew up, 100 years ago, we were hanging around our parents doing what was happening, or 1,000 years ago. We were bundled in the back of our mom and just listening to things as we got bigger. And we slowly learned all the languaging. And I think that one of the mistakes we make when we're teaching now is we put everybody in the same level and then one person talking to them. And there's something about just being around a lot of people that do this all day and hearing what they're talking about, that it may not make sense right now, but it's worth listening to, because you'll now know what those sensitivities are. You're learning, you're ahead of when you need it. You're learning things that you don't know. Like we're not going to give you all the answers, but we are going to expose a bunch of things that you don't know, that hopefully you can then go fill in and ask on Discord and ask here again. So it's just kind of an exploration. I gotta jump to the post show, but you have one last thing, Michael, real quick.
Just a cautionary thing. Remember, if you've just come off of an airplane, if you have a head cold, anything like that, that is going to affect how you hear. That pressure inside here, especially on your middle ear and stuff like that, is going to affect how you hear. So always be aware of that.
Yep. That's good. All right, everybody, jump into the post show. We'll see the rest of you tomorrow. All right. Take care. Got drones